People are joining us. Greetings and salutations. Good afternoon. While we give everybody a moment to join, we invite you to use the chat and tell us where you're joining us from. I'd like to see where you are today in the chat. West Hartford, Connecticut, from Rochester, New York City, Cincinnati, Knightsdale, North Carolina, New Paltz, Winnipeg, excellent. Cedar Park, Texas. Hi, Mom. So my name is Rich Merritt, and I'm your host today. This webinar is brought to you by Audubon State Offices of Connecticut and New York, whose mission it is to protect birds and the places we all need in our forests, on our coasts, and across local communities. Quick reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will immediately tomorrow be available on our Facebook pages and on our YouTube channels for Audubon Connecticut and Audubon New York. Questions are welcome in the chat box at any time, and we will have time at the end for question and answer. I'm particularly excited about this webinar since I've been involved in Chimney Swift tower building projects, and the design and procedures that we've used were written by the Kyles in their book, Chimney Swift Towers. They literally wrote the book on it. And now to introduce our speakers, I'd like to pass the mic to Sonny Kellner, the Wildlife Rehabilitation and Outreach Specialist at Sharon Audubon Center. Sonny, you particularly specialize in rehabilitating chimney swifts. Can you tell us a little about that?
Thank you, Rich. Yes, the Sharon Audubon Center rehabilitates anywhere from 60 to 75 chimney swifts each season, releasing them back into the wild. And the Kyles wrote the protocols that we and other facilities throughout the country use to nurse these swifts back to health. So the Kyles' reach and influence in swift conservation is tremendously far-reaching. Georgean and Paul Kyles have had a love affair with chimney swifts for more than 3 decades. They have hand-reared and released more than 1,100 displaced nestlings, cared for injured adults, designed and built over 200 towers for the swifts to use for nesting and roosting sites. And they work tirelessly to educate the public about these benign and beneficial avian insectivores. In 1995, they founded a continent-wide conservation initiative called the North American Chimney Swift Nest Site Research Project. And in 1999, received the National Partners in Flight Award for their efforts in public awareness. Their book about the secret life of chimney swifts and a companion guide on chimney swift tower construction was published in 2005. And in 2006, the Kyles entered a lifetime partnership with the Travis Audubon Society, TAS, where they donated their home and the surrounding 8 acres to be maintained as the Chaetura Canyon Bird Sanctuary in perpetuity. They continue to live on their property under a life estate and as TAS sanctuary stewards. And if they aren't already your heroes, they also spend their free time building tiny houses. And today they will be speaking to us about the swifts of Chaetura Canyon, chimney swift conservation in general, and what makes these birds so unique. And with that, I thank you for joining our webinar. It is my pleasure and absolute honor to now hand things over to our presenters, Georgean and Paul Kyle.
Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot for having us. My name is Paul.
And I'm Georgean. And thank you, Sonny. That was very sweet. It all started in 1983. We were just volunteer rehabilitation. We were called by the Humane Society to come pick up a box that had a bird that was found on the ground and could not fly. We opened the box, looked at the bird, looked at each other. We could not identify the species. Fortunately, we had Peterson's field guide, and he answered that question, but then became dismayed that in calling all of the rehabilitation centers in the country, no one had any care information for this species. So we were on our own. The bird was not injured. It was just extremely emaciated. With 3 weeks of supportive care, it regained its strength, was able to fly, and we released it. And that's where our story begins. From the 80s through the 90s, we were very often asked why we were spending so much time, energy, and resources on such a common species. And our reply was always the same. Well, why not? Why not keep the common species common? Today, we hope to enlist your aid in conserving this species. They are truly remarkable, and they are not nearly as common as they used to be. So now it's up to Paul.
Thanks, George. George is going to be back toward the end of the program. She narrates the little short video at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here so you don't have the distraction of looking at us, and we'll go ahead and get into the program. Chimney Swifts is Travis Audubon's Chaetura Canyon Sanctuary. For those of you who don't know, Chaetura is a genus of Chimney Swifts. It means spiny-tailed. A little bit about Chaetura Canyon. We're about 15 miles northwest of Austin, and we're next to a reservoir lake, Lake Travis, and Mansfield Dam backs that up. And Chaetura Canyon is right here. A little closer look. Here's a closer look at the dam, and this is Lake Austin. It's a water source for the city of Austin and surrounding communities. And you can see Chaetura Canyon is right in the center of a highly developed area. It didn't used to be that way. Here's a little bit closer view. And you can see that this is the canyon, and there's actually, it's very steep, runs right down through the center. Here is a little ephemeral creek, and the house is located right there, the residence where we're talking to you from right now. In 1972, Georgeanne and I had been married for 3 years. We were in Houston, and we moved up to Austin, came up to visit some friends. They showed us some property, and we put money down on it on the spot. We bought an acre of property. And by 2006, we had added enough property to make it just one lot at a time, to make it about 8 acres. And during this time, we learned about the birds and the plants and everything that was on the property. We knew nothing about any of this before we actually moved out into the middle of it. And in 2006, we turned that over to Travis Audubon as a sanctuary. They took it over, and we kept a life estate. And in 2021, now you can see they've added quite a bit of property. We've gone pretty much up to the boundary lines of the undeveloped properties in this little subdivision. And we've got about 12 acres now. So we've had some really generous donors come in and help us expand the sanctuary. We have 12 acres, so it's small, but it's a very special piece of property. 120 feet of elevation on 12 acres. So you can see there's not much flat space. It's very steep. We have over 2 miles of trails. We're building more all the time. We've identified 170 bird species on the property since we've been here. 350 plant species, which is a lot of diversity for such a small area. We were on a plant survey on a 1,000-acre plot a couple of weeks ago, and they came up with about 300. So it's a very diverse and a special piece of property. We've developed actually 4 water features on the property, in addition to the ephemeral creek and several springs that are in the bottom of the canyon. And there are 18 Chimney Swift towers that we've constructed all around the residence. The first 2 that we built were actually on the house. And this is where we did the research on what worked and what didn't. We used just about every type of material we could find out what worked for the Chimney Swifts and what didn't. And now at this point, we've settled on a particular design. We'll talk a little bit more about that toward the end of the program. Before the pandemic, we used to have a lot of stewardship days. And hopefully we're going to get back into that again before too long. Hopefully this fall, we can start doing our tours again, where families can come out and learn about the plants and the animals in Central Texas. Workshops like Chimney Swift maintenance, and Chimney Swift tower building, nest boxes, that sort of thing. And some of the most fun events that we miss the most are our fundraising dinners, where we get a lot of like-minded people together to share some good food and just enjoy the company of like-minded people. We're really looking forward to things getting back to normal. We can start having these events again. So what is a Chimney Swift? Is this a Chimney Swift? No, this is a barn swallow. It has mud in its nest and has a forked tail. However, they fly together with Chimney Swifts pretty frequently, eat a lot of the same types of insects. So they're commonly mistaken for Chimney Swifts. Is this a Chimney Swift? Well, you may laugh, it's a hummingbird, but it's actually more closely related to the chimney swifts than the swallows are. They have a similar wing structure. They can both fly straight up, straight down, forward and backward. It's just the chimney swifts can't sustain it as long because the mass is so much greater. This is a chimney swift. They're unable to perch like a songbird. They have to cling to a rough vertical surface. They glue their nest to the wall with sticks in their saliva. They collect the sticks and glue it together with the saliva. And they look like a flying cigar or a bow and arrow. And this, can you see it? That's a pretty good look at a chimney swift. That's why they don't get a lot of respect. Once you start to notice the chimney swifts, you'll see them flying around in these patterns like these Chinese kites following each other around. And if you get a real close look at a chimney swift, this is what they look like. And hopefully by the end of the program, when you hear about chimney swifts, this is what your mind's eye will see rather than those little specks in the sky that you can barely notice. Now, they have beautiful bright eyes. This is unusual for a bird to sit still. It's amazing. They can just go into this trance-like state when they're incubating their eggs and taking care of their babies. They look like they're going 100 miles an hour when they're just sitting still, don't they? Just beautiful, elegant little birds. So why should we care about the chimney swifts? They're not colorful. They don't come to the bird feeders. They eat flying insect pests. Things 1/4 of an inch smaller is what makes up the variety of their diet. Their numbers are declining all over their range. They rely almost entirely on man-made structures now, and they are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. This is some of the latest data from the breeding bird survey. This is up in the boreal forest up in northeastern Canada. You can see how badly the numbers have dropped, and they're pretty similar with the lower part of the continent as well. They're just not doing very well at all. A little bit about the chimney swift that sets it apart from other birds. There's another reason why you should care. I mean, just look at that little face. How could you not care about something as bizarre as that? They have tips, the spines on the tips of their tails. Chaetura means spiny tail. You can see those, and that's kind of what separates them from the swallows. If you ever have the opportunity to have an injured bird in your hand, that's one way you can tell between the swift and the swallow. They have these grappling hook-like feet. A lot of the old literature says they have small, weak feet. But if you'll notice, that's a pretty good sized foot, and they cling all night by these claws. And I don't think you consider that weak at all. Also, you can see it's almost as big as a bird's head, so it's certainly not small. Interesting thing about chimney swifts is they don't have scales on their legs like most birds do. If you think about it, a cardinal or a mockingbird or something that has to run through the brush each chaps like a cowboy. But the swifts are in the air, so they don't have to worry about thorns and rough brush and things like that. So they tuck their feet up into their feathers, and they look like they don't have any feet. In fact, they belong to the order called Apodiform, which means without feet. But they definitely do have feet. Even from the day they hatch out, they've got these really strong little claws. They're able to hold on to the nest and cling to these vertical surfaces. Chimney swifts are in the eastern part of the United States, from the tip of Texas, the southern tip of Florida, all the way up into Canada, northeastern Quebec. And they start arriving here around the 1st of March is when they hit the Gulf Coast. We see them in central Texas on March 15th. And by May 15th, they're all the way up into Canada. We don't know much about what they do in South America because there are so many different types of swifts down there. They're just not easy to study. So we know much more about their breeding behavior than we do about their wintering behavior. But they're actually in the United States and Northern America more than they're in South America. So very much our birds. When they arrive, they start to see this mating behavior where they follow each other's movements, feather per feather. Just elegant. They look like Olympic ice dancers, the way they mirror each other's movements. This is a wonderful photograph taken by our friend Greg Lasley. He's probably one of the best naturalists in North America. We lost Greg this year. He passed away earlier from some complications, lung complications. We're really going to miss him, but I know a lot of people out there watching know Greg or have seen his photos. They start building their nest pretty much as soon as they arrive, and it'll take them a week, maybe 10 days or so to get a nest big enough to hold the first egg, and they continue to build on the nest. They'll have from 1 to 7 eggs, 3 to 5 is most common. The eggs hatch out kind of staggered, so you have different ages. You've got this big baby here, big fat baby, and then one shy one that hasn't even come out of the egg yet. They grow pretty fast, and they go through this phase. It takes a long time for their feathers to actually come out. And here again, you can see the difference in the ages. A very young bird on the left and an older bird on the front. And at this age, they're not 14 days old yet because their eyes haven't opened, but they look more like a little prickly lizard than they do a bird. But you can see in the very tips of the feathers here, the sheath is starting to open up. And just in another day or so, they're going to look entirely different. That's maybe 24, 36 hours later, what they look like. We call this the frosty face stage, because it looks like they've got a little frosting on the top of their head. It's really cute when they're at this age. Here's a family at the nest. The kids have all grown up, just a little bit of the feathers left on the top of their head, little feather sheaths. We rehabilitated Chimney Swifts from 82 to 2000. We came up with a substitute diet and developed some housing for them. We worked with the Texas A&M Diagnostic Lab and a lot of other rehabilitators around the country to find out what worked and what didn't. We ended up with about a 95% success rate, and a lot of that was attributed to what we learned about transferring saliva from older birds to the younger birds. Close to 1,200 individuals were cared for and were released during the period of time we were doing rehabilitation. And if you've ever tried to thread a needle, it's easy compared with threading a mealworm into the mouth of a baby chimney swift. They're about the size of the first joint on your little finger when a lot of them would come in. Georgiana would hand feed them one mealworm at a time, and the mealworms had some supplements that had to be added to it. And she would have from 50 to 100 chimney swifts at one time. The younger ones having to be fed every 30 minutes, the older ones fed every hour. We monitored their weight real carefully and compared it with the wild population and found that it correlated really well. So we knew that the diet was working pretty good with the swifts as far as their development. And to weigh them, we just put them in this little Parmesan cheese can, and put them on a scale. And they were kind of acted like they were on an amusement park ride. They kind of got this puzzled look on our face. They were really easy to weigh. And we used muslin cloth. Actually, the mealworms came in this cloth, and we'd line these little boxes with it, and it protects their feet, protects their feathers. It's easy for them to hold on to. And as soon as they got to the point where they didn't want to stay in the box anymore, we'd have to move them out into a flight, bigger area, because they're going to want to start flying, and then they need to fly as soon as they're ready so that they can get their muscles and their feathers developed properly. When we first take them out, they're kind of frightened because there's more sound, there's more light, and they'll hunker down on the bottom. Before long, they'll start climbing to the top to see what's over the edge. And there you go, peeking out and looking. And Georgiana would feed the bird. She'd start on this end, feed this guy, feed this one, feed this one. About the time she'd get here, the first guy being fed would move all the way down to the end and pop up on the end for seconds. Very personable little birds. They learn to fly out, and they'd have to learn to they'd roost on the spring wire, and then they'd have to learn to fly back in, because this is where we fed them. And they'd also need to be able, once released, to be able to get back into a chimney once they came out of it. And we held on to the birds probably a week or 2 weeks longer than they would normally be in being taken care of in the wild. In the wild, they pledged it 28 to 30 days, but because they didn't have the advantage of the parents, we held on to them for 5 or 6 weeks before we turned them loose, just to make sure they could fly well. If you see that shiny spot right there, that's a bird band. We tagged all of the birds that we rehabilitated so that we could follow them in the future and see how they did. And the backup data we got was real positive. So why are the chimney swifts declining? Natural predation is a part of the problem, but it's not a great problem. It's not going to wipe out the chimney swifts. Loss of habitat is one of the main things. They used to nest in big hollow trees. There weren't many of those, so they adapted to nest in the chimneys and these towers that we built for them. Ignorance and intolerance in combination with the loss of habitat is probably the worst reason that we're losing our chimney swifts. Screech owls can predate chimney swifts. Usually they're attracted to roosts rather than nesting sites. Roosts are where you have large numbers of birds that are congregating before and after breeding. But they're not going to wipe out an entire colony. They may take one or two, so they're not a major problem. In all parts of the country, there are these different species of snakes. This is a Texas rat snake. And the rat snakes are all very arboreal. They can climb trees and they can climb chimneys. So they could get in and get a nest full of babies occasionally, but they're not going to wipe out the entire population either. But if you have a nice chimney that the chimney swifts are able to use and raise their young, and it gets capped, obviously they don't have any place to raise their young. So this is a big factor in the decline of the birds. Our ancestors had a really neat solution. I don't think they were thinking about chimney swifts, but if you look at this chimney, it allows the smoke to get out, keeps the rain from getting in, and lets the chimney swifts get in as well. And there are commercial chimneys caps on the market now that you can buy and put on just a regular chimney that will allow the swifts to come and go and still protect the inside of your chimney. Metal chimneys are a death trap to anything that gets into them because they're so slick, the birds can't hold on to them. So all the chimney caps that are metal need to be capped. And this is the more common type of chimney that's being built now. So we're no longer creating the artificial habitat that we used to in the great numbers. We talked about intolerance and ignorance. This was a bird that came to us when we were doing rehabilitation. It looks pretty ragged. Its feet are swollen. And the lady said she found it in the fireplace, and that's all she told us at the time. And we spread its wings out, and the wings were actually melted. So we got back in touch with her, and she finally fessed up that, yes, she had heard noise in the chimney, had lit a fire, hoping to chase whatever was in out, and the birds were overcome with smoke, and they fell into the chimney and were damaged. This bird was not able to be saved. Its respiratory system was so bad, it had to be put down. So it's not a good idea to light a fire in your chimney when you hear a noise. So what can you do to help chimney swifts? Keep the damper closed March through October. If you don't have a working damper or don't have a damper at all, you can wedge a piece of foam rubber up in there to keep the chimney swifts up in the chimney. They don't want to be in your living room any more than you want them there. They want to stay up in that chimney. So it's accidental if they end up in a house. But if you do put that foam rubber up in there, write yourself a note and put it in the bottom of the firebox that it's there, because you don't want to have Thanksgiving come around. Grandma comes over for Thanksgiving dinner, and you light a fire in the fireplace and it gets all backed up with smoke. So be sure and make a note if you put that foam rubber up in there to block the chimney. Keep your chimney properly maintained. This is good for the homeowner as well as the chimney swifts. But improperly maintained chimney can have a creosote buildup, which can become flammable, and you can have a chimney explosion. Also, it makes the chimney wall so slick that the birds can't attach their nest to it, and the nest will fall off. Cap all metal chimneys and create new habitat. We have our website, chimneyswifts.org, where we have a lot of good information, and you can purchase books and information there as well. We published a newsletter, Chaetura, for about 15 years. We stopped publication in 2018, but you can go back and see the archives on these, and you can kind of see how the chimney swift conservation movement has grown over the years. We have documented the work that we did with the rehabilitation. Some of the techniques and whatnot, particularly diet, have changed now because some of the ingredients we use are no longer available, but there's still a good solid reference if you want to rehabilitate chimney swifts. Texas A&M University Press published the Chimney Swift book. It's a life history of some of Georgiana's wonderful artwork, drawings of the swifts in there. This came out in 2005, and the companion Chimney Swift Towers construction guide that came out at the same time. And these are available on the website at chimneyswifts.org. So if you have a chimney, a clay chimney, a flue tile chimney, or a brick chimney, you have chimney swift habitat already, and you don't have to go out and build a special tower or spend thousands of dollars on something like if you're trying to do purple martins, or you have to go out and build a big purple martin rack. If you've got a chimney and you properly maintain it, you have chimney swift habitat right there. If you don't properly maintain it, this is what you're likely to find: a whole nest full of little babies down in the fireplace. And typically they tend to hold on to the nest. And ideally what you try to do is get them back to the parents, because the parents will feed them if you can get them back up there. There's information on the website at chimneyswifts.org on how to do this. It takes some doing. Every fireplace is going to be a little bit different, but it's going to have some suggestions in there. And that's absolutely the best alternative. If you can't do that, then you need to contact the licensed rehabilitator in your area. Chimney swifts are probably some of the most difficult birds to successfully hand rear and release, so we don't recommend trying to do it on your own. The very first Chimney Swifts tower was built by Althea Sherman, and the tower itself is actually this structure here. It's 20 feet long, goes down into this structure. There's a spiral staircase that goes around so that she can look and peek in on the swifts and study them. She built this in the 1930s. It was the first time anybody had done anything like this. And it was a real inspiration for us. And her documentation is still some of the best out there. The only thing that she wasn't able to do that we've been able to add to really as far as understanding the home life of the swifts is what they do at night. And because she didn't have the infrared technology that we do now, we've been able to add that to the data that's available on what the chimney swifts do when they're nesting. We used Althea's general idea of the chimney swift tower and built 2 towers onto our house. They were 20 feet tall. And the first year we actually had a nest in there. And it was really gratifying because one of the parents was a hand-reared bird that we had released the year before. And he came back for at least 4 years in a row with a mate, raised babies each time. We banded the babies, and so we considered these our grandkids. In the fall, we had the wonderful roost. So you kind of get to to thinking if you build it, they will come. This has kind of been our experience with building chimney swift towers for the most part. This is what it looks like on the inside of the roost when the swifts are there. Other people have built towers using our design with some slight modifications. This is at the Strawberry Plains Nature Center in Mississippi. This is at Pascagoula River Refuge, also in Mississippi. It was built out of materials that were salvaged after one of the hurricanes. This is Wolfville, Nova Scotia, and this is the Roby Tufts Nature Center. And it was a dairy, and the Chimney Swifts had been using the chimney, and the dairy was scheduled to be decommissioned and torn down, but because the Swifts were using it, the community came together and made arrangements to save the chimney part of the dairy. And they built a pavilion around it with a lot of good educational information. And so this is a real good, I guess, example for how to deal with some of these chimneys that are being torn down. We're losing these large roosts at an alarming rate. Every one of them is critical to the future of the chimney swifts. They use them primarily in migration. So if you hear of a chimney that's going to be torn down in your community, try to work with your local Audubon groups and educate the community and see if you can get the chimney saved, or at least get them to build an alternative replacement for it if it can't be saved. In the tower book, we also have these plans for a small version of the tower. We call this a kiosk tower, taking the same idea that was used in Nova Scotia. The Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania, under the leadership of Brian Shima, celebrated the centennial of their park system by installing 100 chimney swift towers from May through December in 2017. This was a remarkable conservation project because these are not easy to build. It's a fairly substantial conservation project, and our hats are really off to them. They built in less than a year almost half as many as we built in 30 years. So it was quite a project. We really appreciate when this type of thing takes hold, the community supports it. In the far northern reaches of Quebec, up in the boreal forest, is a little town called Lacadouard. There's an old sanatorium there that's now decommissioned that used to house people that were suffering from tuberculosis. And they went there for the clear air. And in Lacadouard, they have an old water tower, and chimney swifts actually nest in this tower. Right next to the tower is this wonderful, beautiful old chimney. And the people there have come together, raised the funds, and they have restored this chimney and hosts a roost now. And this is the farthest known range, northern range of the chimney swifts in North America. They not only saved the chimney, but they built a chimney swift interpretive center and museum. And one of the craftspeople up there built these dioramas with the chimney swifts, hand carved all of the birds. It's just a remarkable setup. And the information that's on the wall here it's excerpts from our book. And some of it's in English, and then there's also in French, because it's largely French speaking up there. So it's actually making it accessible to the locals to learn about the birds. The gentleman on the right there is Simon Parent. He's the brains behind the Chimney Swift Interpretive Center. And he's also involved now with a project with the Granby Zoo and some of the universities up there. They're radio tagging the chimney swifts, and they've been able to find chimney swifts nesting in the boreal forest in hollow trees, which is a remarkable thing to find. And they're doing some really good work up there, and the conservation work that they do will get some land set aside for them. Hopefully some of the historic lands, and the chimney swifts will be in better shape there. In 2016, the year after the center opened up, Simon was able to get some more funding, and he wanted to build 10 chimney swift towers. So we went back up in 2016, and along with his father, Georgean Parent here, we built 10 chimney swift towers in 5 days. And we installed a few of them. They got the rest of them installed shortly after we were gone. And Georgean was the fellow who did the bird carvings for the museum. We kind of specialized in wooden towers, but we were looking for something after seeing this old cistern in Jonestown. We're looking for something that's going to be more durable. It used to hold a lot of water. It doesn't hold water now, but it holds a lot of chimney swifts. In the roosting season, it can have 2,500 chimney swifts or so. And so this was kind of our take on building something that was a little more substantial using cinder blocks. We thought it was going to be an easy project, but we learned really quickly it wasn't. But it took us most of the summer to get it done. But by the fall, we had a roost move in, and the next year then we had nests in it. This was another experiment with a cinder block. We were trying to see how close we could put the towers together and still have the swifts use them, because swifts will only nest one pair per structure, regardless of how big it is. And we discovered that this is too close together. This is about 3 feet apart. And they need to be 10 to 12 feet apart now, because if they can hear the birds in the other tower, they're going to also try to defend that site as well. But architectural features sometimes can provide some opportunities for chimney swift habitat. If you take a look at these, if these were hollow, open at the top, maybe some drainage at the bottom, we think that'd be really good chimney swift habitat. And it's serving no real purpose except to look nice out there. It's an interesting structure. Here's another example. If these were hollow, happens to be right next to a pizza place, you could go in and get a pizza, maybe grab a beer, sit on the tailgate of your pickup truck and watch the chimney swifts come and go. A lot of stone fences are built this way, and they have these stabilizer columns in the center. If these were hollow, they could also be good chimney swift habitat. Just a little foresight on it, a little thinking, advanced thinking about habitat, and a lot could be developed and provided for the swifts. This is in downtown Austin. There was this row of columns. I'm in a big row of columns, and just imagine if all of those were open for chimney swifts, how much more nesting habitat they would have. The Lower Colorado River Authority owns a lot of property, and they were building an entrance to one of their parks, and they contacted us about putting in a chimney swift tower. And sure enough, that looks like a hangman's noose. If you were in Texas, you'd be afraid of it, but it's actually a light. And this is an entrance to the park, and there's a chimney swift tower right here in the center, a cinder block, and then he used native stone around the edges to decorate it up and make it fit in with the native landscape, the natural landscape. So that's about all we've got to say about structure. We'll go now to the birds themselves. This is a chimney swift in the hand to give you a perspective of the size and how docile they can be. We don't handle them unless we absolutely have to, but it's always a treat when we actually get to come in contact with them and get to see how beautiful and wonderful they are up close. Clouds are beautiful, and the sky's pretty with clouds in it, but it's even pretty when it has chimney swifts. And it'd be a sad sky indeed if we went through a summer here in North America and didn't see any chimney swifts. We've got a little video now of a nesting season at Chaetura Canyon.
Chimney swifts are very tactile and affectionate. This behavior that looks like kissing is called bill fencing. Both parents build a nest, both incubate the eggs, both brood the nestlings, and both feed the babies. It is very much a family affair with chimney swifts. There will be only one active nest per year in any structure, regardless of the size of the structure. Chimney swifts build their nest with small twigs glued together with their saliva. Into a half-basket shaped structure attached to the inside of a chimney, outbuilding, cistern, chimney swift tower, or other dark enclosed space with roughly textured walls. They snap a dead twig from the tip of a tree or bush with their feet while in flight. Transfer it to their bill and return to the nesting site where they glue it in place with their saliva. They will often become impatient if their mate takes too much time with the twig. Here, one bird actually pushes the mate out of the way. It takes about a week to build a nest large enough to hold the first egg. This is a precarious time since the nest is still small. Occasionally, the first egg is lost over the edge. One egg is laid every other day, and clutches range from 1 to 7 eggs. 3 to 5 is most common. Older literature states that all swifts mate on the wing. However, it is now believed that chimney swifts mate in the nesting structure, just below the nest. The male approaches the female, mates in a passionate flurry, and then flies up to sit on the nest. Brooding of the eggs begins when the next to the last egg is laid. The parents keep their saliva flowing by slathering the wall above the nest with a salivary arch, seen here. The saliva is not only important in construction of the nest, but in the health of the babies. It serves the same purpose as colostrum in mammals, providing beneficial flora for their digestive systems and the ability to fight off potential pathogens. "18 to 21 days after incubation begins, the first egg will hatch. The young are blind, naked, and helpless. They are about the size of the tip of your little finger. At first, the parents will have enough food to feed all of the young with one mouthful. Here you can see the stringy saliva that has to be snapped free before moving on to feed the next baby. After all are fed, the parent will clean the nest of any fecal material and settle in to brood the babies. The parents land below the nest and then climb up the wall to feed the young. The youngsters quickly learn this and begin hanging their heads over the edge to be fed. The eggs hatch 8 to 12 hours apart, so there is quite a difference in the size of the oldest and the youngest baby. In many species of birds, the smaller and weaker members of the brood may not be fed. However, with chimney swifts, the parents make certain every chick gets its share. The wing feathers of young chimney swifts remain in sheaths and look more like quills than feathers until they are about 14 days old. Here the young have learned to cling to the nest and start to flap their wings. You can clearly see the age difference between the bird in the background, still pink and featherless. Once a chimney swift is 14 days old, its eyes open for the first time, and the feathers begin to unfurl. This transformation from a prickly lizard-like creature to a bird takes place nearly overnight. The bird on the front edge of the nest is building up its flight muscles. Its siblings, whose eyes are still closed, mistake the flapping for the wings of the parents coming in with food and begin their begging call. Notice how the birds stretch and preen. They are becoming restless on the nest and will soon leave it behind as they climb onto the wall to roost with their parents. There is now just the youngest bird left on the nest, and it is about to leave to join its siblings. Once the babies leave the nest at about 21 days of age, they will never return. But it will be another week before they leave the nesting site for their first flight. Once off the nest, they still cannot fly, but they can climb like crazy. In just a day or so, they will be able to fly up and down inside the nest site like the second older bird. This is Puddin'. He sees his reflection in the camera lens and has come up for a closer look. When he looks straight at the camera, notice how perfectly round and streamlined he is. At this age, young swifts do not like to be alone for long. And he soon goes back to snuggles with the safety of his siblings. These birds are 28 to 30 days of age and ready to leave for their first flight. In the late summer, after all the baby chimney swifts have fledged, they start to gather in large flocks in preparation for migration. At dusk, they begin to circle the roost tower, often putting on one of the most wonderful shows in nature. As the last light of day fades, they begin to dive into the tower to spend the night. Here, the camera is pointing straight down into the tower. It is actually pitch black in the tower, but with the use of specially designed infrared lighting, the Kyles have been able to study the chimney swifts at night without disturbing them. After the last swift has entered for the night, they clump up into tight groups with wings overlapping. Chimney swifts are restless sleepers. Softly chippering and chattering all night, anxious for the first light of day when they can return to the sky. Morning departure is not as organized as the evening entry. The birds jostle for position and leave sporadically. It is easy to see their relationship to hummingbirds in this video. Notice how some of the birds fly straight up and down as well as forward and backward. Who will be the last to leave?
Back at Chaetura Canyon,
they're circling around and faking us out.
the patio party is in full swing.
So when we have folks come out in the evenings to watch the swifts go into the towers, oh, it's so exciting.
Oh, here we go.
It's a mated pair. I think they're feeding.
Food they eat is insects, mosquitoes, gnats, flies, all the things that we swat at and don't want to have around. That's a delicacy to them. That's what they survive on.
Very cool. Here we go. Oh!
There it is.
It's hard to get someone interested in something that's so ephemeral and in the sky all day.
Oh, beautiful.
Until they actually see them.
Oh, look at that. Wow.
So education is the key.
I really didn't know much about chimney swifts before tonight. We have purple martins in our front yard, but I wasn't really aware that chimney swifts are very similar in that way. So see if maybe we can get a chimney out in our backyard too.
This is another design.
So, for these swift saviors, mission accomplished.
We love the birds so much, we want everybody else to care about them the way we do, so that we can have them protected. The more people we can care about them, the better off they're going to be, and the better their chances are in the future.
And so we have a new Swift Tower plan available. It's a great Eagle Scout project, by the way. We've shrunk the tower down from the 20-foot towers that we had on the house, excuse me, on the house. Not many people are going to be able to build one of those. These 8-foot tall towers are really pretty manageable. And for anybody who would like to get a copy of this, it's available for sale at our chimneyswifts.org website. But anybody who's watching this, if you send us an email, we'll be happy to send you a digital download copy of it. And you can share it with as many people as you want, get as many of these towers built as possibly can. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your attention and for attending. And I'm going to turn the video back on here. And there we go. Thanks, folks.
Well, thank you, Paul and Georgeanne. That was wonderful, very informative. If you can just turn off the, well, leave it up there just so they got the chimneyswifts.org promo. And I put in the chat too your email for that generous offer of the set of your new plans. So thank you for that. The floor is open for questions. I know you've been asking some during the presentation, everyone. Please type your questions in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can with the time left. Joining Sonny and I to help facilitate the question and answer is John Connors from Wake Audubon in Raleigh, North Carolina. John and Wake Audubon have a long-standing Chimney Swift program. And I, along with the Kyles, we attended their Chimney Swift Conservation Forum back in 2015. Welcome, John. Before we begin with question and answer, would you like to take a minute to tell us about Wake Audubon's efforts to protect Chimney Swifts?
Sure. First, I'd like to thank Paul and Georgeanne. Great to see you again. You're our heroes on this stuff. I've learned a lot of what I know about swifts from them. And so I owe a lot to them. Here in Raleigh, North Carolina, we've been working a lot with roost sites. And, you know, we built a 30-foot tall chimney and, you know, trying to get, because we were losing so many, we did a complete inventory, all the chimneys in the county, saw where the roosts were, saw how many we were losing. And we actually built a chimney trying to stem the tide. I think the main lesson we've learned is using playback, tape recordings of swifts above a roost really does work to attract them to a roost site. So that's one of the things I would add. I guess I should bring a few questions to the Kyles. I can start with the first one. Is that right? You ready, Rich, for that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so one question was asked, and I find this to be a compelling one. If we want to encourage architects to provide for swifts by leaving towers or chimneys open on buildings they're building, the first question will be, what kind of mess will result from that? I'm sure you've heard that same question asked before.
We have. It's something just about everybody wants to ask. A family of chimney swifts is going to leave maybe a quart of dried material behind after the nesting season. Obviously, if you have a roost with a number of birds, it's going to be a larger amount than that. We have not seen the droppings as a problem. You just need to make a place in the tower so that they can be cleaned out at the bottom at the end of the season. We actually collect it and use it in our compost piles. It's an excellent source of nitrogen. We've been handling it as safely as you can. You know, people who raise poultry mess deal with this mess all the time, but we've never experienced any kind of ill health effects or anything from it. It's just a matter of using a kind of like an ash shovel to shovel it out, put it into a bucket, haul it off, and then you're done. The maintenance on a chimney swift tower is like 15 minutes a year. It's at the end of the season. Basically, you don't mess with them while they're nesting. You just wait until they're gone, and then you can go in and clean up whatever needs to be cleaned up.
And as we mentioned, one nest per chimney, so it's just a little tiny nest per year. Right?
And all the detritus will be actually in the structure. There's no problem around it or on the ground. Everything is inside.
Another interesting thing about that's a good point, is that most songbirds will carry away the baby bird's droppings. They'll carry away the eggshells. With a chimney swift nest, everything gets dropped in the bottom. So if you have a tower, you can go in at the end of the season, go through all the detritus on the bottom, see how many eggs were laid, how many were hatched, if there were any fatalities. It's kind of like doing an archaeological dig at the end of the season. It's interesting to have a group of people out and you drop the bottom off of a tower and you got all this poop and people kind of back away from it. By the time Georgeanne has really gotten into it and started explaining, you can't get a good picture because all you can see is people's backside as they've been overlooking at what you're doing.
Okay.
Alrighty, so another question that we've had is, how do chimney swifts end up in rehabilitation? How do they end up needing assistance?
Don't feel bad.
Sonny, I think you could answer that question very well. Many times the nests will fall, and it's always advisable. There's always ways to get the nest back up. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes there are problems with ants, heat. But once they come into the rehabilitation facility, rehydration is the first thing that needs to be taken care of. And if the tower and the chimney are properly maintained, fallen nests are pretty rare.
Yeah, it's the majority of the birds that we cared for were birds where the whole nest or individual birds had fallen down. And early on, we got a lot of birds coming in from chimney cleaning companies. They were actually forcibly removing the nest, and it was illegal then, and it's illegal now. And we found over the past 30 years that the attitudes with chimney cleaning companies has changed dramatically. They've become good ambassadors for the safety of the chimney swifts. And you get a reputable chimney cleaning company, they won't go near a chimney if the chimney swifts are in there. They'll come back at the end of the season and clean it out and take care of the problem. But they'll let the birds, and they're required by law to let the birds go ahead and live out their life.
A very quick question, I think here. One of our friends in Canada asked, what was the Swift Exhibit Center in Canada? What was the name of that again?
It's called Lac Edward, L-A-C, Edward, Lake Edward. And it's about 3 hours by road from Montreal. Beautiful drive, by the way. And it's also a neat place to go visit in the summertime because they have glamping there. They've got these wonderful tents set up, and it's on this beautiful lake, beautiful setting. It's a wonderful place to visit, even if you don't want to go see the chimney swifts.
So we have some people working here in Raleigh with purple martins, and they use a playback system. They play recordings of the dawn song, and it draws purple martins to a new colony site. Have people been doing similar things with the nesting towers, trying to draw swifts using some sound system of playback?
Yes, they have. And some of the people actually, they swear by it, say that it's just a wonderful way to get swifts to come to a new structure. Our colleague, Kelly Applegate in Minnesota, wrote a little paper on how to use a chimney swift callback. And we have CDs available at our website, chimneyswifts.org. And along with that comes some instructions on how to play it, when to play it, and what kind of results to expect. But most of the people who have tried it just really swear by it. They may not have any swifts in the area. As soon as they start playing that callback, they'll start to see them. So, of course, nothing is guaranteed. You know, I'm sure people are going to ask, if you build a tower, are you going to get chimney swifts? there are no guarantees with chimney swifts or purple martins or bluebirds or anything. You never know. The birds have their own minds about what they like and what they don't like. But all we can say is that the towers that we've built, 80% of the ones that we've put up of the best designs since we got it wired have been occupied the first year. But I have to add to that, we do have a few towers that have never been occupied over a period of 10 years or more. So you're not going to have 100% acceptance for them, but it's usually pretty good.
Sunny?
There are a few people who have been asking the difference between the nesting locations, nest sites, and the roost sites, and if they're ever shared. And
they're definitely shared. The breeding pair does not necessarily enjoy having the extra company. When there is a roost, it will be in the upper third of the structure. The nest will be in the lower third of the structure. And the parents, the adult birds, will defend that territory in between to keep the interlopers out of their bedroom. So it's very common to have a roost and a nest in the structure, mainly because the nesting sites are disappearing. First year birds, once they return from migration, can and will breed that very first year, but they have to have a location. So anytime you have a summertime roost, all the birds in there are not breeding, and they could.
So there's a question about predators coming to the nesting towers. Raccoons, snakes, have you had issues with that?
We did initially, but the tower design is such that predators can't climb it. We use a smooth material on the outside called hardy. It's a kind of a concrete product, and it's a little difficult to work with, but once you get it up, it's pretty much bulletproof, fireproof. It's slick, so predators can't climb it. If you build a wooden tower, you have to put a predator guard around the top of it, like 2 feet of metal right around the top. So if something climbs, it can't get all the way up to the top and get in and get to the nest. Now also the towers have to be located far away enough from overhanging trees or buildings where a predator like a raccoon or a cat or a squirrel, even as a predator, can jump to the top of the tower and enter it.
Okay, good.
And if we were to put up a Chimney Swift tower, is there any guarantee that they would find it right away? Is there a certain amount of time that it usually takes for swifts to find the tower next season or after that?
We always try to recommend patience, or what our veterinarian called tincture of time. Some of them are going to be occupied just right off. If you have a new tower up before they return to migration, your chances are going to be pretty good that it'll be occupied the first year. But you never know. It's always just kind of a toss-up as to whether or not you're going to be able to get the birds in there. A Chimney Swift tower is not an inexpensive thing to build, and it seems like it would be a very expensive birdhouse for one nesting pair. But if you think about it, compare it with like a bluebird box. Bluebirds are going to use that for nesting, and then they're done with it for the season. You build a Chimney Swift tower, you've created a home for those birds the entire time that they're in North America. They're pretty much going to stay there the whole time. They can't roost in trees. They can't roost in bushes. They have to have a safe place that's inside and dark with a rough textured wall where they can be safe. And that's what the Chimney Swift tower or a chimney is going to be. And so you're getting really more bang for your buck than just building a bird house. You're actually building the summer home for a species that's in decline.
We only have time for one more question, and I know we didn't get to a lot of yours. I'll put in the chat here in a moment the email addresses for Audubon New York and Audubon Connecticut. If you have questions that are burning that we haven't gotten to, please feel free to send it. I'll also put Paul and Georgean's email address again. I saw that was asked another couple of times if you want those plans. And just a reminder too that this is being recorded and it will be on the Audubon Connecticut and Audubon New York YouTube and Facebook pages by tomorrow morning if you want to relive the glory.
So there have been a couple questions about the habitat where you would actually put up a chimney swift tower. Can it be put up in the woods? Does it need to be in the open? What's the ideal setting?
Basically, wherever you want to put it, as long as it's, say, 20 feet, 10 to 20 feet away from any overhanging bushes, trees, structures. If it's next to a structure, it needs to be taller than the edge of the roof where it touches the tower. Here at Chaetura Canyon, we have them in open fields, we have them in the woods, we have them down on the hillside, and all of them for the most part, with few exceptions, have been used. The Swifts are just so desperate for nesting sites that the chances of putting one up are going to be pretty good. If you're going to put one up, it's a good idea. Once you consider the proximity to trees and whatnot, put it someplace where you can easily watch it in the evening, because that's when you're going to see them the most, is when it gets to be with the sun going down, they'll come in and then they'll start to go to roost. So it's pretty much wide open. We've had people here in Austin put them in their front yards in downtown Austin, so they can go places.
Is Austin like the chimney swift capital of the country, you think, now because of you guys?
No, I think it's the grackle capital of the world. But there is a lot of interest here, and there are towers in the area. We've built over 200 towers, and the majority of them have been here in the Central Texas area. A lot of them actually in urban Austin.
Well, Paul and Georgean, thank you so much for this exciting presentation today. It meant a lot to me. John and Sunny, thanks for joining us, and that's all the time that we have. But thanks everyone for joining us. Our webinar series is going on hiatus in July and August. We'll be back in September, and we're booking our fall and early winter webinars now. We haven't shored up the dates, but look for those email invitations, everyone. We will have, I don't know which dates, but Dustin Partridge from New York City Audubon is going to present on urban green roofs. Gloria Lendijo will present on bird conservation and ecotourism in Colombia, which is exciting as we're all getting excited and think about traveling again. Steve Hagenbuch will talk to us from Audubon, Vermont about bird-friendly maple, yummy. And Rodney Stotts will present a fascinating story. He's a master falconer, and his story will be compelling. So please look for those invitations. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.